I've been asked to talk about hope, and I think there are times when it seems natural to think about hope, to talk about hope, and even to have hope. And I think the first lockdown really felt like one of those times. Things were really tough, but we were going to get through it. Things weren't going to be normal or okay for a time, but they'd definitely be getting back on track, at least by Christmas, and if not by Christmas, definitely by 2021. Yeah, so it's a little bit harder to talk about hope now when we've gone through a strange Christmas. We're into 2021, and yet things are still bad. The pandemic is raging. There's a new variant that's even more transmissible than before. The case levels are shooting up. The vaccines are good news, but we still don't know when we're going to get to see people again, to hug people again, to be able to go to the shops without making sure to remember our mask and our hand sanitizer. So talking about hope in this situation seems a bit crazy. It seems a little kind of like wishful thinking, a bit naive. In fact, I think the most often I've heard the word hope this year is in the phrase, we'd hoped. We'd hoped to get away. We'd hoped to go on our normal holiday. We'd hoped to get to our friend's wedding. We'd hoped to be back in work by now. We'd hoped. And it seems to have come to me so often, the word hope, in phrases of hopes that just weren't met, that didn't happen. And it looks like we're going from one year of those unfulfilled hopes maybe into another one. So why keep hoping? What's the point in hope? And I think the answer is that hope isn't equal. Not all hopes are made equal. Not all hopes are equally worth holding. And not just about what we hope for, but what we hope in. What's the root of our hope? If our hope is rooted in something solid or real, or whether it's just what we desire, what we want, just wanting the future to look a particular way. And you see there's lots of hopes like this that are just what we want. And some of these are pretty harmless. They're kind of the wouldn't it be nice if hopes. The hope, that one day we'll come into lots of money and get the big, nice house or the shiny car or the dream holiday or the dream job. They're nice hopes. We don't really set much store in them. It'd be nice if they happened, but they probably won't. It's not a big deal. They're fairly harmless. But not all of the hopes that are dreams, that are false hopes, are equally harmless. In fact, some of them are really strongly rooted in a person or an idea. People hold to them very strongly, even though that root isn't real. And we can see that this leads to disaster. We saw this to a really tragic effect earlier this week. In America, there's a group of supporters of Trump who had their hopes so set in him being re-elected that no matter the truth, the evidence that he'd lost the election, it didn't change their minds. And ultimately, this led to the tragedy of the act of domestic terrorism that they carried out, attacking the Capitol building, because they were so convinced of their hope, even though it wasn't rooted in reality. And we see this tragedy continuing as even Trump has turned around to say, no, you shouldn't have done that, you're in trouble. And the people who placed their hopes in him were just dropped. They're now in a situation where they're going to be looking at jail and charges and things because their hope wasn't real, no matter how strongly they held it. And we've seen this all over, particularly in the last few years. We've seen it with the pandemic as well, with people who are so desperate to hope that maybe the virus isn't real or isn't as bad as people said, or that a miracle cure exists. We've seen, again, that these false hopes bring really damaging outcomes from people who've hospitalized themselves by drinking bleach and taking other miracle cures that weren't cures, to the tragedy of rising outbreaks and deaths from people choosing to intentionally break the rules because their hope that this isn't real is so strong. And it's not just about the pandemic or about people with political views and things. False hopes in so many areas have been on the rise in recent times. And I think there's a couple of big reasons for this. One, I think, is the internet, that whatever you want to believe is true, you can go on the internet and you can find someone telling you that it is. Whatever you want to place your hope in, there is someone peddling that somewhere on the internet. But I think it's more than that. I think it's more than just that you can find it, but I think it's the sense of control it gives people, the illusion of control, that the thing you want to believe is true. You can believe it, and then you can choose to do what you want based off the back of that. And it's really tempting But ultimately, every time we see that these hopes, they're not real, they've not got any basis in truth, so they collapse and they bring harm to those who hold them. So far, you might not be holding out much hope for hope. It might seem, well, if all these hopes are false and baseless and they just lead to, at best, daydreams and disappointment, at worst, tragedy, why bother with hope? But as I said, not all hopes are made equal. Some hopes are rooted in truth. They have real, solid evidence behind them. And they look at the reality of the world and they start there. And you might think that's a terrible idea. Reality is terrible. Why would you start in reality for your hopes? But actually, if we set aside the pandemic for just a second, don't worry, I'm sure it will still be there when we get back to it. We can find that actually research says that the world is a lot better place than it's been. I've got this book, you might not be able to see it from there, it's called Factfulness. I'm not doing a book blog, but I am because I like this book. But the focus in this book is that actually, even though we see more and more terrible news and access to global media means that as soon as something bad happens anywhere in the world, it's on your telly or on your phone, that consistently life has gotten better, year after year, generation after generation. Things like global poverty are much less than they ever were. Things like child mortality are much lower than they ever were. And things like life expectancy are much higher. So there are things in reality we can have hope in. The world is getting better. And if you want to give yourself a little bit of hope about this, if you go to gapminder.org, there's a quiz, and you can find yourself surprised by how many ways in which the world is improving. It doesn't mean the world is perfect, and it's not a perfect hope. But there is evidence of good things happening. And it's similar, talking about the vaccine, that we have hope in the vaccine, and there is a good reason to have some hope there. Evidence shows that vaccines generally work. That's why I've never had to fear polio or smallpox. And the trials say that it looks like the new vaccines will work pretty well. They have pretty high efficacy rates. But even these hopes, though they're good, they're not perfect. They say that for a large percentage of people, a large percentage of the time, a lot of things are going to be good. They don't say that all of the time for everyone, everything's going to be great. And in fact, when you're in a situation where your false hopes have failed you, that's tough. But also when you're in a situation where you know that statistically this shouldn't have happened, that you are an outlier, that the tragedy that's affecting you or your family is unlikely, that doesn't give you any hope it's going to get better. When you're the person who is in that percentage that is still dealing with children dying in your family, that's still dealing with tragedy, knowing that statistically for most people they're not dealing with this isn't going to lend you hope. So is there a hope that is perfect, that is better than all of these, that works in all of these situations? Yes, there is. And if we look in the book of Hebrews, it says, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Now you might think, great, faith, blind faith, much better than false hope. Really? But we often think that when we think about faith. We think of it as again, that kind of wouldn't it be nice daydream sort of hope. It's largely harmless, but largely powerless too. And in fact, we often see Christianity mischaracterized as, or oversimplified as just a sense of, well, it'll be all right in the end, so you can get through the slog of life just now. You know, it's an optimistic dream of heaven, so it's going to be okay. But that has faith backwards. Faith isn't just hoping in that daydream sense that the future's going to be okay, so today we'll make do. No, faith is the opposite of that. It is rooted in reality, and it's rooted in remembering God's goodness, both in our past and in our present, and that's what gives us a solid, unshakable hope, not just for the future, but also for today, for right now. To many people, 2020 feels like it was the worst year ever, and it seems to be carrying on. And to be fair, in my life, it's up there. It's pretty bad. I've never experienced a disaster that's affected us in Britain so much. I've seen disasters abroad, but I've never seen one quite so global. I've never gone this long in my life without seeing my family. It's been over a year now, and I know the pandemic's not been that long, but it's been over a year since I've seen my family, and it's been a struggle. And it's been horrible. And for me, that's been tough, but I've had it fairly easy. For many others, it has been a tragic, terrible year where they've experienced loss of life, their own lives, or the lives of loved ones, or the loss of their livelihoods. It's just been a brutal, brutal year and a brutal time. However, the Bible really gives us a great sense of perspective when it comes to this, because it shows us and reminds us that brutal times are nothing new. In fact, they seem to have been one of the marking features of the people of God. If we keep on reading through Hebrews 11, we find a list of the heroes of faith, but we also find a catalogue of their suffering. The people of God were a people of hope. They had a solid and certain hope, but they were also people of suffering. They faced slavery, war, and exile on a regular basis throughout their history. Why did they keep hoping in the midst of all that suffering, when all that they hoped for seemed so far off? And if the answer was just, well, they got what they hoped for, we'd be disappointed. If we read on, we see that all these people died still believing what God had promised them. And all of them, even though they earned a good reputation because of their faith, none of them received all that God promised. So why did they keep hoping? Why did they keep going? Because they were convinced of who their hope was in. Not just what their hope was for, but who their hope was in. They knew God. They knew his goodness. The author of Hebrews goes on to say in Hebrews 13, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today and forever. He doesn't change. And this echoes what it says, what God says when he revealed his name to Moses before sending him off to free the Israelites from slavery. I am who I am. Or also his name translates as I will be who I will be. God's very definition is consistency. He is certain and he doesn't change. And his promises can be trusted. They don't change and they don't fail. And we see this throughout the whole story of the Bible. Yes, the history of God's people contains a lot of suffering, but we also see again and again that no matter how bad things get, no matter how far his people fall, no matter how often they turn to false gods, false hopes, he is the God of rescue. He rescues them time and time again. He rescues them, he raises them up, and he reestablishes them. And he does this every time they fail. He is the God who keeps his promises to his people no matter what. What he says he will do, he does. But sometimes, as we saw for the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11, we have to wait for our hopes to be fulfilled. If we go back to that passage, back to the end of Hebrews 11, we see that it's not just that their hopes weren't fulfilled, but that they weren't fulfilled yet. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised, for God had something better in mind for us, so they would not reach perfection without us. It wasn't that their hopes weren't going to be met, it's just that they hadn't been met yet. Despite this waiting, they were completely confident of God's promise and that he would keep it. They could look back and see how he had kept his promises for generations before them again and again. And this is a gift that's also available to us. When we struggle to have hope, when we struggle to see where God is working in our lives, we can look back at all that he's done before and know that he's still that same God. The same God who brought the Israelites up out of Egypt and parted the sea for them. The same God who kept Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego safe in a burning furnace. He's the same God who raised his son to life again. So this means that like the heroes of faith that we see in Hebrews 11, if we place our trust in God, we also get to share in their rock-solid hope of an awesome future, with a God who will make all things new, who eradicates pain and death and wipes every tear from our eyes. And this is amazing, but crazily amazingly, God doesn't just stop there. Doesn't just stop with giving us an eternal life of peace and harmony, but he also promises us hope right now in the midst of everything that we face. As we heard at the start of the service from Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help us, and an ever-present help in times of trouble. And Jesus himself declared that he will come to bring us life to the full, and that he will be with us always, even until the end of the age. And in Deuteronomy, God's people are promised to be told to be strong and courageous and not to fear, because he is with them and he will never abandon them. The source of our hope in God that he offers us right now in the midst of our life, whether we're facing tragedy or triumph, peace or panic, is the same hope he gave to his people throughout history, and the same hope that we look forward to in the future, his unfailing presence with us. This has always been God's promise to his people and will always continue to be. He is our hope. He doesn't promise us that the pandemic won't affect those close to us. He doesn't promise us that the things we want will happen, that our favourite politicians will get elected, or that we'll get the dream house, the job, or the car that we'd like. He doesn't even promise us that we'll keep the job we've got right now. And in fact, he tells us to lay down the desires we have for our lives and to let him be in control and to trust him with that control. But he promises with that through every step of the way, no matter what 2021 or any other year throws at us, that he will be with us always, even to the end of the age. Now you might think, that sounds great, that sounds really nice, but I don't see that. I'm not a hero of faith. My faith is fairly stumbling, and I haven't felt God's presence near me in this time. I've been struggling. And there's another bit of hope that he offers us. And I've not written this down. I found the verses for it. So, but he tells us that we're a people. And you notice I spoke the whole way through that God gives hope to his people. We often, when we read the Bible in English, we read the passages that talk about you as individual instructions to individuals to keep going with their faith. But actually, God talks to his people. The Greek for you is for a group of people. And one of the major hopes and sources of hope he gives us so that we can see his presence is the church, our family together. In fact, in another point in Hebrews, it says, don't give up on meeting together. And you might think, well, we've been told not to meet together. You're sat in a church on your own. But actually, meeting together doesn't just mean being sat in a building together. The person who wrote Hebrews was not in the same church building as the people who read the letter. It's a letter of encouragement, a letter of hope. And we don't have to rely on letters because we've got Zoom and Facebook and every other kind of communication available. But we need to keep going as a church. We need to keep talking to each other, holding each other together. If you're struggling to find hope, to see God's presence in your life, talk to your church. Come and join us on our Zoom chats. Come and engage. There will be somebody there who will show you by the way that they talk to you, the way they love you. They will show you Jesus. And I'm going to finish now, just before I hand over to Beth to pray, with a quote from one of my favourite books this year. And it's been a tough year, so it is a picture book with very few words. It's The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. No idea if I said his name right. But this is a beautiful quote. We have such a long way to go, sighed the boy. Yes, but look how far we've come, said the horse. Keep going, have hope. God is the same today as he was yesterday and will be forever.
Thank you, Finn, for that message. And I think it's just important for us to reflect on what's been said and to have some time to do that, and also to pray, to pray that we will know that hope in our lives, that it's not just an uncertain faith of things to come, but that we can have that hope now, today. And so we'll just spend a bit of time, and I'll just play quietly. And I'd just encourage you to spend some time reflecting on what Finn has said and praying. And if there's anything that you're struggling with, anything that you would like prayer for and that you're happy to share, then I would encourage you to do that in the comments on Facebook and YouTube, so that we can be praying for one another. As Finn said, we are a family, and we want to be holding each other up and praying for one another. So do share if there's anything that you'd like prayer for, and share your prayers in the chat. So I'm just going to pray quietly, and then I'll close this time by praying. Father God, we thank you. We thank you that you are faithful, that you are with us, and that we can have hope in you. That as we sang earlier, we can have strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Father, I just pray for whatever it is that we're going through right now, that we would know your presence with us, that we'd know your peace and your comfort and your joy and your hope, that we wouldn't see this hope as just blind faith, but that we would see it as true and certain, as something that is rock solid. And I pray that as a family, as a church family, we can build one another up, we can share together, we can pray together, we can encourage one another, and that love for one another, that would outpour into the community, that people would see your love, that they'd see that there's something more that they can hope in, that as the world strives for hope, for something to look forward to, that they would meet you, that they would see your love and know that is available for them. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're just going to sing again together. And it's a song that talks about God's promises, that God's promises are true, that we can rely on them, that we can stand on the promises of God. Again, following that theme of God's faithfulness, that he is always with us, and that he is right there, and his love is everlasting, and his promises never fail.